The Story of Civilization, Part 2, The Life of Greece, a history of Greek civilization from the beginnings, and of civilization in the Near East from the death of Alexander to the Roman conquest, with an introduction on the prehistoric culture of Crete by Durant. Chapter 7, The Greeks in the West. Section 5, Sicily. We have left, not quite to the last, the richest of all the regions colonized by the Greeks. To Sicily, nature had given what she had withheld from continental Greece, an apparently inexhaustible soil fertilized by rain and lava, and producing so much wheat and corn. They got to be referring to something with a kernel. That wasn't what we say with corn. That Sicily was thought to be, if not the birthplace, at least a favorite haunt of Demeter herself. Here were orchards, vineyards, olive groves, heavy with fruit, honey as succulent as hymettus, and flowers blooming in their turn, from the beginning to the end of the year. Grassy plains, pastured sheep and cattle. Endless timber grew in the hills, and the fish in the surrounding waters reproduced faster than Sicily could eat them. A Neolithic culture had flourished here in the 3rd millennium before Christ. Well, the Christian date to Christ, but basically about the same thing, because 100 years earlier doesn't really change that aspect. A bronze culture, and the 2nd, even in Minoan days, trade had bound the island with Crete and Greece. Towards the end of the 2nd millennium, 3 waves of immigration broke upon Sicilian shores. The Sicilians came from Spain, the Elami from Asia Minor, the Sicels from Italy. About 800, the Phoenicians established themselves at Mantua and Panormus, also known as Palermo, in the west. From 735 on, the Greeks poured in, and in quick succession founded Naxos, Syracuse, Leontini, Messana, also known as Messina, Catana, Gela, Himera, Selinus, Acragas, and it could have been a century, it could have been a generation later, so about, 20 years later, then could have been 715 BCE or something like that. Most of them retired to till the mountainous interior. Some became slaves to the invaders. So many others intermarried with the conquerors. That Greek blood, character, and morals in Sicily took on a perceptible native tint of passion and sensuality. The Hellenists never quite conquered the island. The Phoenicians and Carthaginians remained predominant on the west coast, and for 500 years periodic war marked the struggle of Greek and Semite, Europe and Africa, for the possession of Sicily. After 13 centuries of domination by Rome, that contest would be resumed in the Middle Ages between Norman and Saracen. And I think Saracen's a slur, so I would be worried about using that. Catana was distinguished for its laws. The Lipari Islands for their communism. Himera for its poet. Segesta, Selinus, Acragas for their temples. Syracuse for its power and wealth. The laws that Charondas gave to Catana a full generation before Ceylon became a model for many cities in Sicily and Italy, and served to create public order and sexual morality in communities unprotected by ancient morals and sacred precedents. A man might divorce his wife, or a wife her husband, said Corondas, but then he or she must not marry anybody younger than the divorced mate. Corondas, according to a typically Greek tale, forbade the citizens to enter the assembly while armed. Just like government buildings, you have the right to bear arms, except, you gotta leave your gun before entering the courthouse. One day, however, he himself came to the public meeting, forgetfully wearing his sword. When a voter reproached him for breaking his own law, he answered, "I will rather confirm it," and slew himself. If we wish to visualize the difficulties of life in colonies carved out by violent conquest, we need only contemplate the curious communism of the Lipari, i.e. the Glorious Islands, which lay to the north of eastern Sicily. Here, about 580 BCE, some adventurers from Cnidus organized a pirate's paradise, preying upon the commerce about the straits. They brought the booty to their island layers and shared it with exemplary equality. The land was owned by the community. A part of the population was assigned to till it, and the products were distributed in like shares to all the citizens. In time, however, individualism reasserted itself. The land was divided into plots, individually owned, and life resumed the uneven tenor of its competitive way. On the northern course of Sicily lay Himera, destined to be the Plataea of the West, their Stesichorus, maker of choruses, at a time when the Greeks were tiring of epics, recast into the form of choral lyrics the legends of the race, and gave even to Helen and Achilles the passing nobility of modern dress, as if to bridge the gap between the dying epic and the future novel. Stesichorus composed love stories in verse. In one of these, a pure and timid lass dies of unrequited love. In the style of provincial madrigals are Victorian fiction. At the same time, he opened a pathway for Theocritus by writing a pastoral poem on the death of the shepherd Daphnis, whose love for Chloe was to be the main business of the Greek novel in the Roman age. Stesichorus had his own romance, and with no less a lady than Helen herself, having lost his sight, he attributed this calamity to his having handed down the tale of Helen's infidelity to atone to her, for she was now considered to be a goddess. He composed a Palinode, our second song, assuring the world that Helen had been kidnapped by force, had never yielded to Paris, had never gone to Troy, but had waited intact in Egypt until Menelaus came to rescue her. In his old age, the poet warned Himera against giving dictatorial power to Phalaris of Acragas. He cast his warning into the form of a fable. A horse, annoyed by the invasion of a stag into its pasturage, asked the man to help it punish the poacher. The man promised to do this if the horse would allow him to bestride it, javelin in hand. The horse agreed. The stag was frightened away, and the horse found that he was now a slave to the man. Being unheeded, he moved to Catana, where his monumental tomb was one of the sites of Roman Sicily. West of Himera lay Segesta, of which nothing remains but a peristyle of unfinished Doric columns, weirdly rising amid surrounding weeds. To find Sicilian architecture at its best, we must cross the island southward to the once great cities of Selinus and Acragas. During its tragic tenor of life, from its establishment in 651 to its destruction by the Carthaginians in 409, Selinus raised to the silent gods 7 Doric temples. Okay, if you know more about that, their names and that sort of thing, comment. Immense in size, but of imperfect workmanship, covered with painted plaster, decorated with crude reliefs. The demon of earthquake destroyed these temples at a date unknown, and little survives of them but broken columns and capitals sprawling on the ground. Acragas, the Roman Agrigentum, was in the 6th century BCE the largest and richest in Sicily. We picture it rising from its busy wharves through a noisy marketplace to the homes on the slope of the hill and the stately Acropolis whose shrines almost lifted their worshippers to the sky. I'm sorry, getting bit by bugs and it's distracting me. Here, as in most of the Greek colonies, the land-owning aristocracy yielded power to a dictatorship representing chiefly the middle class. In 570, Phalaris seized the government and secured immortality by roasting his enemies in a brazen bull. He was particularly pleased by a contrivance that made the agonized cries of his victims sound through a mechanism of pipes like the bellowing of the animal. Nevertheless, it was to him and later dictator Durant that the city owed the political order and stability that permitted its economic development. The merchants of Acragas, like those of Selinus, Crotona, and Sybaris, became the American millionaires of their time, upon whom the lesser Plutarchs of older Greece looked with secret envy and compensatory scorn. The New World said the Old was interested in size and show, but had no taste or artistry. The temple of Zeus at Acragas unquestionably sought size, for Polybius describes it as a second to none in Greece in dimensions and design. We cannot directly judge its beauty, for wars and earthquakes destroyed it. A generation later, in the age of Pericles, Acragas raised more modest structures. One of them, the Temple of Concord, survives almost completely, and of the Temple of Hera, there remains an impressive colonnade, enough in either case to show that the Greek taste was not confined to Athens, and that even the commercial West had learned that size is not development. In Acragas, the great Empedocles would be born, and perhaps it was there, and not in Etna's crater, that he would die. Syracuse began, as it is today, a village huddled on the promontory of Ortygia. As far back as the 8th century, Corinth has sent colonists armed with righteousness and superior weapons. Well, hopefully the righteousness directs their ethics of war or not war. To seize the little peninsula, which was then perhaps an island, they built or widened the connection with the mainland of Sicily and drove most of the Sicels into the interior. They multiplied with all the rapidity of a vigorous people on a resource full soil. In time, their city became the largest in Greece, with a circumference of 14 miles and a population of 500,000 souls. An aristocracy of landowners was overthrown in about 495 by a revolt of the unfranchised plebes in alliance with the enslaved Sicels. The new democracy, if we may believe Aristotle, proved incapable of establishing an orderly society, and in 485, Galon of Gela, by a program of enlightened treachery, set up a dictatorship. Like many of his kind, he was able, as he was unscrupulous. Scorning all moral codes and political restraints, he transformed Ortygia into an impregnable fortress for his government, conquered Naxos, Leontini, and Messana, and taxed all eastern Sicily to make Syracuse the most beautiful of Greek capitals. In this way, says Herodotus, sadly, Galon became a great king. Galon of Syracuse says, Lucian had disagreeable breath, but did not find it out himself for a long time, no one venturing to mention such a circumstance to a tyrant. At last, a foreign woman, who had a connection with him, dared to tell him, whereupon he went to his wife and scolded her for never having, with all her opportunities of knowing, warned him of it. She put in the defense that as she had never been familiar or at a close quarters with any other man, she had supposed all men were like that. He was disarmed. See, that's one of the benefits of chastity, actually, is that you're not looking for the best here or there. You're looking for, well, this is suitable. I didn't know it was a problem. He redeemed himself and became the idolized Napoleon of Sicily. When as Xerxes' fleet moved upon Athens, the Carthaginians sent an armada, only less numerous than the Persian, to wrest the island paradise from the Greeks. The fate of Sicily was joined with that of Greece, when in the same month, tradition said, on the same day, Galon faced Hamilcar at Himera, and Themistocles confronted Xerxes at Salamis. And we're not showing the Greek characters in this book, so I'm sort of not sure about how to pronounce some of that.